Now, Tom Cruise's relationship with his daughter is in the spotlight also.
When Katie Holmes left him, because he really has had nothing to do with Surrey since Katie moved on.
Most fans believed they understood everything about Tom Cruise and his private world. Yet his daughter has now spoken out in a way that nobody anticipated. What she revealed has created a wave of shock because it challenges the polished image that surrounded him for so long. Imagine New York on a cold spring morning, the kind where the air is sharp enough to make you check your coat twice, and the subways breathe steam up through the grates. Around Soho, gallery doors open a little slower, coffee cups are held a little tighter, and most people are too busy being themselves to care who else walks by. On one of those mornings, a young woman in paint-spattered clothes and headphones steps into the light, carrying a portfolio that might as well be a diary. She signs her name, sets her work down, and walks away without saying a word. The name on that art is the same as the name that once dominated entire news cycles: Suri. For years, her existence was a story other people told. Paparazzi lenses made her childhood sidewalks front pages. Strangers debated her outfits. Adults who had never met her used her as shorthand for everything from celebrity excess to custody battles. Then, almost as suddenly as it began, that noise dropped away when Katie Holmes left Tom Cruise in 2012 and rebuilt her life in New York with her daughter. The shutters kept slamming downtown, but one child's face slipped out of frame. Lawyers filed. Arrangements were made. Reporters speculated. But for the most part, the dynamic became a private fact instead of a public script. The gap between Tom Cruise, the movie star, and Tom Cruise, the father of Suri Cruise, became one of Hollywood's most whispered questions. It is important to start here, with what we know and what we do not. Tom and Katie's divorce settlement included primary custody for Holmes, with Cruise given visitation rights and financial support obligations. In the years immediately following, coverage noted that he was rarely seen with his daughter in public. Interviews asked carefully pointed questions. Tom answered some, dodged others, and once sued a magazine that claimed he had abandoned Suri, later acknowledging in a deposition that his involvement with Scientology had been a factor in why he did not see her as easily once Holmes left that world behind. After that, he said less. So did she. The space between them hardened into something you could feel, but not a diagram. While the tabloids chased their own reflection in that silence, Suri was growing up the way a lot of New York kids do. Walking to school, learning how to be invisible in a city that is both ruthless and generous about anonymity, finding corners of the world where your name matters less than your work. Holmes made clear through rare, careful comments that protecting her daughter's childhood was non-negotiable. She talked about wanting her to have a stable, innocent childhood and keeping her out of the machinery that had once turned their daily lives into spectacle. The choice worked better than anyone could have reasonably expected. Outside the occasional street photograph and graduation rumor, Suri moved through middle and high school as a rumor, not a storyline. Then, slowly, she started to speak, and people realized they had been waiting for it without knowing exactly what it was. The first voice we heard was not in an interview or a tell-all, it was in a song. In 2022, when Katie Holmes wrote and directed the indie film Alone Together, sharp-eared viewers noticed a credit over the closing track, Blue Moon, performed by Suri Cruise. The song played over the end credits, a familiar standard carried by a voice that was young, clear, and warm in a way that made you check the listing twice. Holmes later confirmed that she had asked her daughter to sing for the film, and that Suri had agreed because she loves to sing and trusted her mother's project. The world had been asking for years what Suri thought. Her first public answer was not a sentence. It was a melody. For people who expected fireworks, that might have seemed small. In reality, it was a very specific kind of statement. She had stepped into the world of art as herself, on work that belonged to her mother, not to her father's universe of blockbusters and stunts. No press conference, no red carpet. Just a credit at the end of a story about two people finding unexpected refuge during a lockdown. The message between the notes was simple. She would choose when and how to use her voice, and she would do it first, in service of something that had nothing to do with being Tom Cruise's daughter and everything to do with being Suri. Around the same time, a different kind of sighting began circulating quietly. Her art. New York has a way of absorbing the children of fame and spitting out artists who want to be known for their work instead of their last name. Word started to trickle in that Suri was as comfortable with brushes and paper as she was with a microphone, and that pieces of hers had begun to appear in small, earnest corners of the city. No big gallery debut, no daughter of headlines splashed across opening night, just friends of friends stories and the occasional blurry photo of a canvas in a window with a signature that made people stare for a beat. What shocked people once they put the pieces together was not that she was talented. It was that she had managed to grow that talent in the one place where her father is almost mythic, and do it on her own terms. Tom Cruise, the man who will hang off the side of a plane for a scene, has been almost entirely absent from her public adolescence. There have been no recent photos of them together, no joint premieres, no holiday spreads. Meanwhile, Katie Holmes and Suri have been seen often, walking, talking, carrying bags, sometimes dressed in ways that got them snapped, sometimes looking exactly like what they are, a mother and daughter in a city that recognizes them and mostly lets them be. So when she began to let the world hear and see pieces of herself, fans and observers alike projected their own questions onto it. Is this a quiet rebuke of her father's world? Is it an embrace of her mother's? Is she trying to step into the industry or sneak around the edges of it? The truth, as far as anyone outside the family can honestly see, looks less like a manifesto and more like something healthier. A young woman claiming art as her own language, separate from whatever relationship she does or does not have with her father. That is the part that genuinely surprised people who have spent years treating her as a symbol. The truth she offered was not a direct quote about Tom Cruise. It was the shape of her choices. She enrolled in school, she worked on creative projects, she allowed her name to appear where she wanted it to appear, and nowhere else. She did not sit down for a glossy magazine cover story about my life as Tom Cruise's daughter. She did not produce a viral clip denouncing him or defending him. She painted. She sang. She walked into adulthood like any other well-guarded New York kid, turning the volume up on what she loves and down on everything else. To understand why that landed so hard in the public imagination, you have to remember the intensity of the early years. In the mid-2000s, Tom Cruise's life was a global soap opera. The Oprah couch, the whirlwind romance, the birth of a daughter whose name became shorthand for the entire saga. Photos of Suri as a toddler and small child fetched obscene prices in the tabloid markets. Every expression on her face was parsed. When Holmes left the marriage and moved to New York, she did so in a way that suggested strategic planning, not just for herself, but for their daughter's ability to have something like a normal life. Changing schools, changing coasts, changing patterns of visibility. It was a rare example of someone in that position successfully pulling a child out of the blast radius. You can see that strategy in the way Suri's adolescence unfolded. There were scattered street photos and grainy zooms from across the avenue, but there was no social media feed full of curated lifestyle shots, no early branding as an influencer, no attempt to trade on her last name for fashion campaigns. Instead, there were stories about high school musicals, anonymous reports of a good singing voice, murmurs about strong academics. It felt, almost shockingly, like what you would hear about the daughter of any single working mother in the city, who cared more about her kids' grades and friends than about booking them as the next global sensation. The moment her name landed in the Alone Together credits, that whole history flashed across people's minds. She had been on the front of magazines in dresses chosen by stylists before she could talk. Now, the first time she really raised her voice in public, it was as a singer on a small film, doing a standard that has outlived more famous performers than her entire generation has had birthdays. That is the kind of symmetry a novelist would be afraid to write because it looks too neat. In real life, it read as something quieter, a soft, firm declaration. I will not disappear, but I will not be defined by the loudest parts of my parents' story. What about her relationship with Tom? That is the question everyone thinks, but not everyone asks out loud. The honest answer, from everything on the record, is that it is complicated and private. Tom has not been photographed with Suri in many years. He has spoken publicly about his love for his children in general, and has a close relationship with his older adopted children, Connor and Isabella, who remained in Scientology and in his orbit. With Suri, the lines were drawn differently once her mother left the church and took her to New York. Reports have said that his physical distance increased after that split. Legal documents from his defamation case against a tabloid made it clear that his devotion to Scientology played a role in why he did not see her commonly during certain periods. That is as far as it goes in terms of verifiable, non-speculative detail. Everything else is dots people connect, according to their own biases. Some see Suri's growing artistic presence far from Hollywood as a quiet indictment. Others see it as a young woman simply living her life while the world insists on reading subtext into every move. The truth she has shown the world thus far is not about who she is to Tom Cruise. It is about who she is becoming in spite of the gravitational pull of that question. Look at the way she carries herself in the rare candid photographs that slip through. Headphones, books, oversized coats. Some days she looks like any NYU student or high school senior on their way to or from a class, half ready for rain, half lost in thought. The shock, for people who first met her as a tabloid baby in designer dresses, is that she grew into someone who seems remarkably uninterested in performing for anyone. That, in an era where many celebrity children are building public brands before they graduate, is itself a statement. Katie Holmes has spoken about how proud she is of her daughter's independence and creativity, noting in interviews that Suri is an incredible singer and a strong, intelligent young woman. When she cast her in that closing song, she explained that she likes collaborating with people she trusts and loves, and that her daughter fits that description. Importantly, she did not push Suri into acting roles or force her into the spotlight as a co-star. The film credit felt more like a family favor that happened to be really good work than a launch strategy. Once again, the message between the lines was that Suri gets to decide her involvement level. That might be the most shocking truth of all to people who follow celebrity families. In so many cases, the children are raised as extensions of a brand, future content for magazines and campaigns. Here, the daughter of one of the most famous and famously intense actors on the planet has been allowed to build an interior life first, then let the parts of it she wants to share leak out slowly. She chose to speak through song and art in projects under her mother's wing, not through a splashy interview about her father. Of course, that has not stopped the speculation machines from labeling every move as commentary. When she recorded another song for her mother's later film, Rare Objects, it sharpened the picture. Singing was not a one-off. It was something she kept returning to, quietly building a portfolio of work in an industry that knew exactly whose daughter she was, and, to its credit, mostly treated her like any other young collaborator on an indie project. If you were waiting for a quote about Tom, you had to accept a different kind of answer instead: the work itself. So, what truth did Tom Cruise's daughter tell the world that left everyone shocked? It was not a line from a courthouse transcript or a leaked diary entry. It was a pattern. The pattern of a young woman raised in the eye of a storm, choosing, consciously, to walk out of it and into rooms of her own making. The pattern of aligning herself with her mother's quieter creative path instead of her father's opera of spectacle. The pattern of showing that you can inherit fame like a last name and still decide to be known by your first. That small professional choice sits at the center of what her truth looks like right now. She could have stayed a ghost in the culture's imagination, a half-remembered toddler in old tabloid spreads. Instead, she took a controlled, creative step into the public square. She said, in effect, "I am not just a story other people tell about my parents. I am someone who can contribute to a piece of art, and I will do it on terms I trust, with a person I trust most." People tend to want celebrity children to answer yes or no questions. Are you close with your famous parents? Do you approve or disapprove of their choices? Will you follow their career or not? Suri seems to be answering a different question entirely. What kind of life do you want, knowing the world thinks it already knows you? Her answer, in action, looks like this: a life where her face is not her primary currency, where she can walk to school without a production, where singing for a film is an act of love and craft rather than a brand launch. There is a tension in that choice that fascinates observers. Tom Cruise's entire public persona rests on full commitment to spectacle. He hangs from planes, rides motorcycles off cliffs, runs like the earth is chasing him. He has spoken about his work as a calling, an all-consuming drive. Suri's emerging persona is almost an inversion of that. She seems to gravitate towards small, intimate work, an indie film end credit, a song in a movie that premiered at festivals instead of opening on thousands of screens, art that whispers rather than shouts. That contrast is part of what has people saying they are shocked by what she is doing. They expected, if she ever surfaced, something big and declarative, a glossy cover, an acting role in a summer movie, a bombshell interview in which she finally tells all about her father, her childhood, her feelings about everything we have all projected onto her since the day she was born. Instead, she is gently telling a different story, that you can inherit a global spotlight and still decide that your real work happens in rooms where almost nobody is looking. The shadow of Scientology hangs over any discussion of Tom's family. It is not a secret that the church prizes its own community and can complicate relationships with people who leave. When Katie Holmes exited both the marriage and that orbit, it was widely reported that she did so in part to raise Suri outside of that framework. Tom himself acknowledged, in sworn testimony during his lawsuit against a tabloid, that his affiliation with the church contributed to why he did not see his daughter commonly after the split. That is as close as we are likely to get to a public summary of why their relationship appears estranged. For a child, and then a teenager, growing up with that dynamic must have been surreal. On one side, a father whose face is on billboards around the world, whose films define entire eras of popular culture, and whose belief system created real boundaries around contact. On the other, a mother rebuilding a life in New York, walking her to school, helping with homework, auditioning and directing, and doing the grocery run between takes. Suri's choices as she moves into adulthood seem to express, without saying it out loud, where she found her footing. Look at where her work shows up. New York, not Los Angeles. Low-budget features, not mega-budget franchises. Collaborations with her mother, not her father. There is no hint that she is angling for a role in the next Mission Impossible. Instead, we see a pattern of someone who loves creative expression but does not want the industrial machine that comes with the Cruise name. She is not rejecting the film itself. She is rejecting the idea that she is obligated to follow any path but her own. This is where the nature of her truth becomes clear. The public expected commentary on Tom. What they are getting is commentary on herself. That in itself is a kind of rebellion. So many celebrity profiles of daughters frame them entirely in relation to their fathers. So-and-so's daughter breaks silence. So-and-so's daughter finally speaks. Suri's life, as we can see it, refuses that framing. She exists as a whole person long before anyone gets to her father's name in a sentence. That is not an accident. It is a line she and her mother have been drawing since 2012. It is not that she has denied or erased him. You do not erase a figure like Tom Cruise from your identity. He is written into her DNA and into the public's memory. What she seems to be doing is something subtler. She is declining to let that be the headline of her own story. She appears to accept that people will always connect her to him, but she is not interested in supplying fresh material for that conversation. Instead, she is feeding a different conversation about herself, one that is about voice, craft, study, and friendship. Listen again to that recording of Blue Moon. The choice of song matters. It is an old standard, associated with generations before her own, grounded in melody and phrasing rather than vocal fireworks. Her delivery is simple, unaffected, emotional without being showy. She does not grab for runs or high notes just because they are there. She serves the song. That is one of the clearest statements you can make as an artist. I am here to serve the work, not to use it as a platform for spectacle. Compare that to the way her father talks about movies. Tom will gleefully tell you how he and his collaborators designed sequences to make audiences gasp, how he trained for months to pull off a stunt, how he chases bigger and bigger set pieces in the name of giving people something to talk about on the way home from the theater. Both approaches have integrity. They are just pointed in very different directions. His art is about scale and adrenaline. Hers, so far, is about intimacy and atmosphere. The world is only just starting to see hints of her visual art. That, even more than the music, offers a path to a fully separate identity. Paintings and drawings can hang on a wall without a headshot attached. A viewer can respond to them without knowing the artist's last name. Imagine a small gallery show where people wander in off the street, stop in front of a piece, and feel something. Later, when they glance down at the label, they register the surname and feel that little electric jolt of context. The work came first. The name arrived later. That order of operations is everything. People are often surprised to learn that Suri is not trying to turn into an influencer. In an age where the children of actors and musicians build massive online followings before they are even out of high school, she remains essentially offline in any official sense. There are no verified accounts where she posts daily glimpses into her life. No stream of brand deals, no vlogs about growing up Cruise. That is an absence that speaks volumes. The truth she is telling with that silence is that she does not owe the public a running commentary on her existence. Tom Cruise's career, especially in the past decade, has been defined by maximalism. The larger, louder, and more daring the films, the more he leans in. He does talk shows dangling from ropes, premieres at the edge of deserts, and red carpets on aircraft carriers. He is most alive publicly when he is doing something that nobody else would risk. Suri, in contrast, appears to be crafting a life where risk is emotional and creative, not physical or promotional. Singing on your mother's film is a different kind of leap than riding a motorcycle off a cliff, but it still requires courage. You are putting a part of yourself into the air, and trusting that it will land gently. Another truth hiding in plain sight is the way her mother has oriented herself around Suri. Katie Holmes has turned down projects, rearranged schedules, moved coasts, and carefully chosen work in order to be present. She has spoken openly about wanting to give her daughter as normal a life as possible, and about how motherhood became the central organizing principle of her own choices. That does not make Tom a villain. It simply means Suri grew up steeped in one parent's values more than the others. It is no surprise, then, that when she began to show herself to the world, we saw those values reflected. Is there pain under all this? It would be naive to imagine there is none. Growing up tallied by strangers, knowing that your father is adored and scrutinized by millions while being largely absent from your day-to-day is not a simple foundation. It leaves questions, probably some anger, probably some forms of longing that do not resolve neatly. The most remarkable thing is that she has not chosen to work that pain out in public. Not one interview, not one social media post, not one quote in a magazine about how she feels about him. That restraint has left a lot of people stunned. In the current climate, it is almost expected that a celebrity child will eventually tell their truth in capital letters for an audience with all the rhetorical fireworks that implies. Suri's version of telling the truth looks different. It is incremental. It is through work. It is through where she shows up and where she does not. It is through credits, not confessions. Step back and you can see the arc clearly. As a small child, she was an object in the middle of someone else's narrative. As a teenager, she was a ghost in tabloids that had once devoured her image. As a young adult, she is an artist in training, trying out her voice and her eye in a city that values both. Tom Cruise's legacy is part of the backdrop, but it is not the stagecraft of her life. The truth she has let the world see is that she refuses to be reduced to a relationship she did not choose. Where does that leave Tom? Still Tom. Still making impossible films. Still one of the biggest movie stars on the planet. Still a committed Scientologist. Still a father to 3 children who have, each in their own way, navigated the complications of loving or leaving that orbit. With Connor and Isabella, he shares a faith and a public presence. With Suri, he shares DNA, history, and, from the outside, a visible distance. We do not know what texts may pass between them, what letters, what intermediaries, what silences have been broken or are still intact. That is theirs. What we do know is that for the first time, the world is seeing Suri as something other than a supporting character in Tom's story. She has stepped into her own frame. However small the stage may be right now, it is hers. The shock is not that she had something to say. It is that she chose to say it this way, through measured creative work, through path choices, through the refusal to cash in on the name that everyone else cannot stop bringing up. There will come a day, perhaps, when she sits down for a long, careful conversation about all of this. Maybe it will be in print, maybe in a documentary, maybe never. If she does, the world will listen, and plenty of people will think, at last she is telling her truth. The irony is that she has already been telling it, just not in the format we are used to. Every time she signs her own name to a piece of work that has nothing to do with his face or his franchises, she is telling it. Every time she walks down a Manhattan street in headphones, ignoring the cameras and focusing on her own errands, she is telling it. Every time she chooses to let her mother's projects be the platform for her creative debuts, she is telling it. Tom Cruise's daughter told the world the truth by showing, not saying, that she is not a question we are entitled to answer. She is a person we are lucky to watch grow, from a respectful distance, as she figures out how much of herself to share. The shock, for everyone who thought they knew how this story would go, is that sometimes the boldest statement is not an expose. It is a refusal to play the game at all. When you strip away the speculation and the hunger for drama, what is left is something almost simple. A father who built a towering, complicated life. A mother who stepped out of that tower to protect her child. A daughter who is now old enough to begin writing her own pages. The world wanted her first words about Tom Cruise. She gave us a song instead. Before you go, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe, because the next part of this story is even more surprising. When you turn on notifications, you will always be the first to know when a new update drops.